Welcome back to the Black Table here on the Black Star Network. I'm your regular host, Greg Carr, And here's where we spend our weekly hour devoted to topics of particular interest to people of African descent and to others working to build a better society. Today, we continue our work of intergenerational conversation with representative thinkers from across the world. And we've had some giants in this space over the arc of our short time on the air. One particularly comes to mind, two actually, one an African born in the United States, another African born in West Africa, Gerald Horn and Toyin Falola. We have a brother who is, in the words of one of his great teachers, James Turner, is really at the center of his generation, which is my generation, our generation of thinkers and workers in the struggle to build a better world. And that's none other than Kwasi Konadu. Kwasi Konadu, Dr. Konadu, is a number of things. He is a healer. He's a scholar. He's a publisher. He's a master teacher. He is a son, a grandson, a father. He is a husband, a practitioner, and he is an obosomfo. Now, I know if my tree doesn't exist, so he's going to correct me in a moment. His most recent academic appointment was at Colgate University. He served there as the John Catherine MacArthur Chair. He taught across the disciplines, rooted firmly in Africana studies. And we're going to hear about his life, his journey, his work. And so get your young people in particular to come to this session at the Black Table, because you're going to learn a lot about how to move through the world as a representative thinker and as a fighter for a better world. So we are honored here at the Black Table to welcome our brother Kwasi Konadu. Welcome, Prof. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm great. Thank you for having me.
With great pleasure, brother. We hope to have you back over and over again. You say you have made it back to as Elijah Muhammad would say, the hells of North America, but you just came back from a few places, huh? Where have you been, brother?
Well, the beginning of this month of March, I spent about 2 weeks in Ghana, working with some folks on the ground. Some great people who were working with young people, both young men and women, through the auspices of sports, in particular U.S. football. And so what was really cool was that shout out to my brother Yao Usu Kuroma. He plays for the Cleveland Browns, and he and some other brothers had organized these camps that essentially use football as a way to teach these important life skills, values, cultural values, actually. In fact, during the flag football teams, all the teams had representative ancestors, from Nabuyi Nehanda to Amilcar Cabral to Kwame Nkrumah, and you name it, Ose Tutu, Yao Santua. And so basically, this brother that I speak of, Yao, really has a lot of foresight for a brother who's in his early 20s to be able to use the mechanism of football to really engender these sort of cultural competencies, leadership skills, and this type of work ethic that's required in order to not only survive, but thrive in this world that we live in. And of course, to be rooted, of course, in ancestry. So I was honored to be a part of that group. I also had a chance to be sort of I would say tour guide, but cultural ambassador and translator for the group as we moved our way from Accra to Kumasi and then Oko to Techiman further north, came back down. So it was really a great 2 weeks of just building with those, folks that he knew, which became my people now, but also the young people that were part of these camps that were so energetic, so enthusiastic, and really put a lot of effort and work into the camps. And I think those relationships, will last a long time. In fact, we plan to do it again next year as well. And so as soon as I came back from Ghana, around mid-March, a week later, I was in Jamaica to see my father and to do some work with some folks down there. And I just came back actually a few days ago.
Oh man, that's wonderful. So as we were saying before we started, you've been home and you've been home. So,
Right.
Before we go any further though, and we really, this is a unique opportunity. I didn't mention you all here at the table that I did mention that he's an author, of course, and a remarkably prodigious scholar. Many of your books, whether it be the Akan Diaspora in the Americas or Akan Pioneers or your 2-volume documentary work around the Akan people, and certainly connected to your blood ancestors. there in Jamaica. And so if you don't mind, Bob, I know I introduced the word that you are known by, and a title that you're known by is Obosonfo. I know I'm butchering it, so you'll clear it up for us. But also, your people, your Akopong side, the Jamaican side, the Maroon side, you have a healer background and tradition. So maybe if you don't mind saying a couple of words about that Akan diaspora, as you have lived it and are part of it as part of the Jamaican diaspora.
Sure thing. So what happened? Something happened to me this past December. I was in Brazil. I was in Salvador da Bahia. And the reason I was there is because my spirit told me to go there, and come to find out that I not only have a very strong anchoring within Akan ancestry that is within the confines of the Republic of Ghana today, but also ancestry from Benin, what is now Benin anyway. And so, I carry as well a very old, ancient, I would say, African spiritual force known popularly as Shango, but is rooted in a very more ancient, formation of that precedes Dahomey and those formations in West Africa. For those who are watching or will watch and are familiar with West African history over the last 1,000 years or so. And so, come to find out that my circuit in terms of who I am as a package of my ancestry also spans these folks from what is now Benin. And so Benin and Ghana, not so much a nation state, but the people who inhabit those places are very much tucked into, this package that is really formed or constitute, who I am. And so in that constellation of people, I come from through my mother's line, which is how I trace my ancestry. I come from really a long line of healers. My grandfather, my maternal grandfather, was a healer, and he's the one who I was reared with when I was born and raised in the island of Jamaica. And then my grandmother's mother, my great-grandmother, was also a healer. It skipped my grandmother because she became a Pentecostalist and lost her mind. And so then my great-great-grandmother was also a healer, and her mother was a healer, and her mother is the one that I've come to know as Ajwa Konadu, and that's how I get my name. Yes. And she's the one that was brought from the then Gold Coast, present-day Ghana, to the island of Jamaica, and she's the one that marooned. And so she had joined the Kampong group in the western part of the island in the parish of what is now St. Elizabeth, but way up in the mountains. And so that ancestry really is just filled with these women, but also men, that have this ability to be able to see differently and hear differently, and also to communicate with these forces of nature, energies of nature, really, because human beings are simply just interplay energy and matter, right? And so we're all connected in this sort of broader circuit, but there are those that have the ability not to see worse or better, but just different, and hear differently, and be able to use those forces, for therapeutic uses, for healing, but also for defense, because I don't want to make people think that this is all about harmony. It's also about, war. And so many of my Maroon ancestors use those spiritual forces, weaponize them, in fact, against British, French, and other European empire seekers and colonists during the 17th, 18th, 19th century. But even after, that period, those energies and that work, that healing work continued, on the island. And of course, it found its way into me. And so I embraced that from a very young age. In fact, I was sort of, I would say arrogant, but I thought children my age when I was 6 and 7 years old were too childish. Because what I found fascinating was hanging out with my grandfather, right? So, and my grandfather was the one that taught me all these rituals, that would show me how to do this and that, that would tell me Nancy stories by the open fireplace at night, eating roast corn over the fire. One of my most fondest set of memories that would give us these medicinal baths, keep away, negative, evil spirits periodically for my brother and I. And so, and many much more that my grandfather shared with me. And it's interesting that he passed away only months after I came to the United States with my mother. And when he passed away, I think I was probably one of the first persons he came to visit in my dream. He came to me. And so I knew my grandfather was always with me and will be always with me. And it's only he, because, you know, I speak to him, you know, in my dreams, and he tells me that he's simply representative for all the other people that are behind him, from Benin and from Ghana. And so he's a spokesperson, you know, for them. And so that engagement continues because, again, you know, spiritual culture and material world are tightly braided. You know, they can't be disentangled as if you would disentangle a quilt. And that reality to me is one of the most important contributions that the African world has to offer this world. Is how tightly woven and bounded these aspects of human life are. And when you take that holistic view, that's when you begin to start living life.
This is so insightful, brother, because your work, your public facing work, is so deeply rooted in ancestors, and also in carrying that into the living present, into the present we experience here. When we come back, we're going to look at some of your work. But as you were talking, and even as you opened up with how you spent the last few weeks, it was coursing through my mind, how were you integrating football in West Africa? And then when you said it was ancestors, it's almost like you gave us a little libation there at the beginning. But I said, man, he called these ancestors. I want to say Ashe. You know what I mean? but when we come back after the break, if you don't mind, let's talk a little bit about your journey as a man, how you emptied all of this into these spaces and ultimately are really overflowing the boundaries of the Western Academy, and really showing us and helping us have find roadmaps to connecting intellectual work to the type of deeply spiritual practices that we need to sustain ourselves and to thrive as a people. We'll be back in a moment here at the Black Table with our brother Kwasi Konadu, Dr. Konadu, and we will be back in a moment. See you in a second.
Folks, Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punches!
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America, Roland.
Stay black. I love y'all.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
Welcome back to the Black Table here on the Black Star Network. I'm your regular host, Greg Carr, joined today by Dr. Kwasi Konadu. When we left, Professor Konadu, you were describing this connection. And of course, it's very popular these days with the Woman King coming out. Folk think they know something about the Fawn or the homie, but to have a connection with Shango and to have that line, brother, and to be led by the spirit. You know, one of the reasons we wanted to have you on in this initial conversation was to highlight your two most recent books, a book of primary sources, which is remarkable, Africa's Gold Coast through Portuguese Sources, 1469 to 1680, and the book Many Black Women of This Fortress. Of course, there's Adwa there as well, right? Garcia, Monica, and Adwa, 3 enslaved women of the Portugal's African Empire. But as is your practice and being, and as you would have us understand all of ours, if we will simply release into it, tap into it, and do the work spiritually, so much of what you said so far connects in some ways with this remarkable text that you published in 2019, Our Own Way in This Part of the World. You have developed a very, very powerful capacity to listen, to be present. And as you describe your work around Brother Kofi Nanko and his community, himself, a man who you never met, A man, however, who is everywhere except in the archives, which you did something about with this book. Could you tell us a little bit about how this book reflects your process of deep listening and spiritual work, and how these individuals that you've written about, whether it be the women and men of the East, one of your earlier books, or Kofi Danko, represent this practice that you're talking about, this essence of who we are? Could you lead us through, some of how this book went on all the way as part of the work, kind of illustrates some of the things you brought up in the first block?
Sure thing. In fact, I think the statute of limitation for for graduate school work has expired. So I can say this is that since graduate school work, first at Cornell, then at Howard, I have always used that space and the resources available in those spaces, to really further my and deepen my connection with my ancestry. And so essentially, I've been fronting all these years, pretending to be, an academic, yes, when in fact, I'm just crazy deepening and furthering my connection with my ancestry through the work that I do. And so, in many ways, I met Kofi Danko through my ancestry, and it happened this way. It was 2000 or 2001, where I was still a graduate student at Howard University, and I, didn't have a topic for dissertation, but I knew I wanted to do something around healing and medicine, and I had a dream where I'm walking on this path that essentially is a clear path, a very clear day. No one is around, and there's a rock, a smooth rock to my left as I'm walking around this path. And as I hit the turn or the bend of this path, this figure jumps out from under the rock or behind the rock, and he says to me, dressed in red, he says to me, if you want to know more about your great-great-great-grandmother, that's Ajwa Konadu, right? You have to go to Ghana. And she's the one who came from the Gold Coast, present-day Ghana. And so that's what I did. And so the rest has pretty been history. And so when I got there, I didn't know anyone. My tree was very basic, greetings and so on. But what I did do, I just listened, and in terms of intuition. And nowadays, this subspecies of scholars called scientists have been saying that intuition is a higher form of thinking. But actually, it isn't. It's not thinking. It's listening and hearing, and there's a difference between listening and hearing, right? Yes. And so you can hear, which means you can use your auditory senses, but listening is hearing and doing, right? It's hearing and acting on. And so what I did when I heard and saw that message, I acted on it, and I got a ticket right away on what was then called Ghana Airways. It's now defunct, unfortunately, but I got on that Ghana Airways, flight, and made my way to Kotoka International Airport in Accra, the capital of Ghana. And I went first to Koforidua in the eastern region, to Ayoko, a small village, to where, my first stop, which was through some people I knew in DC who had a connection. And from there, I went to Kumasi to stay with a family of a brother I met who worked in the school where I taught in DC. And he provided janitorial staffing for that school. And so he hooked me up with his family, stayed there for a few days. And then in those days, there really wasn't any telecommunication system in place. You had to buy a card and put it into public payphone. And the calls were routed through Europe, and they came back to Ghana. And you could hear the pause, right? Yes. And so the infrastructure wasn't in place. And so I would just leave a message at a fax machine center in Techiman, and hopefully the person would get the message and hopefully call me back in a time that I would also be next to a phone, right? And so in those days, the process was much more complicated and much more trickier. But I made it there, and I later found out the person who I encountered was one of the sons of Kofi Danko. I didn't know that. And he and I started to connect. I had a letter from my friend Nana Kwekwasechi in Florida, who introduced me to the family. Come to find out that was Kofi Danko's family. I was in the compound. I stayed there in the compound. And that's also where Kofi Danko is resting in place, because traditionally the Akan people used to bury their elder households, at least within the compound, in one of the rooms. They would not be placed into a cemetery away from the family compound. And so that's where he rests is where I stayed in that compound. And so I met Kofi Donko in spirit, but not in person. And as I kept, walking around the town and, making introductions and follow my way through, trying to learn the language, I would tell people that who want to speak to me in English that do not speak to me at all. I want to speak only in Chi. And that's really how I began learning, is by forcing people not to speak to me in English. And so I would pick up little by little, over the years and get better at it. My questions became better. My probing became better. And even though I wasn't concerned with Kofi Donko per se, he was omnipresent. He was always around, because whoever I spoke to, they would mention him. And so ultimately, to make the short story shorter, over 10 years of doing this work in Ghana and having maybe 3 or 4 books published, the time was right for me to start writing that book. And so I started writing the book for Kofi Donko in 2017. This is after about 15 years of just deep digging and research and, sort of suturing together these fragments, that I found along the way. So you asked a question about methods, and my methods is driven by intuition. I don't have a research plan that's 20 pages long. I don't have a detailed, sort of outline about what it is I want to accomplish and, what are my delimitations and variables. All that stuff is really in my head and in my body. And so the way that I proceed is that I have a certain kind of sense about a problem or an unresolved question. And what I want to do is I want to toss that question or problem in as many ways as possible. Think of the problem as, let's say, chicken, right?
Yes.
Chicken is ubiquitous. I want to barbecue it. I want to rotisserie it. I want to fry it. I want to fricassee it. I want to essentially, angle that question or problem in so many ways to get the most out of it. I want to see from all the particular angles that are possible, that are plausible, so that I can see what kinds of evidentiary materials are needed to essentially satisfy the demands of the question or the problem itself. I also want to do is I want to separate, when I look through the sources that come out of that question or that problem, I want to separate observation from interpretation. So what you find is that people will read a source, particularly myself, will read a source from the 18th, 19th century, in the case of Kofi Donko, 19th, 20th century, and all sources are biased because they have to be. They come from a particular point of view, right?
Yes, sir.
And so I don't look for bias. What I look for is I read between and against the grain. I look for things that are silences and disclosures. I look for, as I fricassee and fry and barbecue, I'm looking for all those things to run out, to pour out essentially. And as they pour out, I then have to separate observation and interpretation. So when somebody says, look, we met these healers in the early 20th century in a place called Akuyapong or Akompong. And these healers said this and that. I said, okay, well, that language is in German, right? And I know German as a language has a certain structuration. But I also know that it has a certain vocabulary because these are recorded by missionaries, right? German, Swiss missionaries. These are the layers that I have to work through as a scholar and as a historian. What I mean by barbecue, frying, fricassee, I got to work through these layers. They're missionaries, they're Swiss missionaries, they're Basel missionaries, they're German missionaries, right? They're Protestant missionaries. And so I got to look at all these layers. And I look at, well, first of all, they're listening to Chi, translating into German, and then I'm translating from Chi to German back to English, right? So I got to think about the entire suite of translations and what can go wrong and what can go right, right? And so these are technicalities that perhaps most people don't think about, but I do, and I pay attention to all of them. And so I'll say, for example, as I did in the book, Our in this part of the world, that readers have to be mindful that I am translating from 19th century German, which was a translation from 19th century Chi to German into 21st century English, right? And in that process, there are certain things that the German could not compute or understand or grasp because their vocabulary didn't have the receptors to receive a concept like obusumfo. There's nothing in German to receive and be able to grasp that concept, right? There's nothing in German, 19th German for bayi, which some people translate roughly as witchcraft, but it's not that, right? Yeah. And so I have to guide the reader, say, hey, this is the process that I'm working through, and I need you to stay with me, because if you stay with me, you get to the other side, which is the side of comprehension, right? Then you know why I'm interpreting this text that way, or why I'm interpreting this song that way. So there's a refrain that these women sing, having this festival by the Beza missionary in the Tonka in Kranza, where Kofi Donko was born in the village of Kunta Dumasi. And they're basically mocking the Beza missionary station who said, look, we ban you from playing that kind of drumming and music. And they said, look, we're playing it in front of your face, in front of your station, and you can't do anything about it.
This is, I really hate to pause here, but we have to, of course, go to our commercial break. But when we come back, please, let's stay in this same rhythm and energy, because there's a beautiful symmetry. There are beautiful symmetries to the whole full arc of your work. And we see how you enter and exit communities and institutions as is necessary to do the kind of revealing work that you're doing. So let's stay in this rhythm when we come back. We'll be back with our brother, Kwasi Konadu, here in the Black Table. Back in a moment.
When you talk about blackness and what happens in Black culture, we're about covering these things that matter to us, speaking to our issues and concerns.
This is a genuine people-powered movement.
There's a lot of stuff that we're not getting. You get it, and you spread the word.
We wish to plead our own cause. Too long have others spoken for us. We cannot tell our own story if we can't pay for it. This is about covering us. Invest in Black-owned media. Your dollars matter. We don't have to keep asking them to cover our stuff. So please support us in what we do, folks. We want to hit 2,000 people, $50 this month, raise $100,000. We're behind 100,000, so we want to hit that. Your money makes this possible. Take some money orders. Go to P.O. Box 57196, Washington, D.C. 20037-0196. The Cash App is $RM Unfiltered. PayPal is R Martin Unfiltered. Venmo is RM Unfiltered. Zelle is Roland at RolandSMartin.com.
Welcome back to the Black Table here on the Black Star Network. Remember to support all of the shows on the Black Star Network. Support the network. Download the app. Tell your friends. Join the Bring the Funk fan club. As you can see, we're building something here, and it's truly remarkable. Prof, when we left, you really were helping us by demonstrating. In fact, in Many Black Women of This Fortress, you enter the archive and you reveal who these three sisters are, these representative sisters in the 15th and 16th centuries, these Africans who are caught up in the process of expansion, European expansion, and they resist, but that resistance is in the archive and isn't in the archive. And even as you've given us this major source of archival texts in Africa's Gold Coast through Portuguese sources, many of which never appeared in English, you are reminding us in the second block there, you reminded us that this is just a point of departure and that you have to listen. And the Egyptians, as we know, made that distinction between listening and hearing. And so when you talk about silences and disclosures and how you listen, you came to the academy with a developed capacity for that, right? I mean, because of your apprenticeships, right? I mean, your first book, Indigenous Medicine and Knowledge in African Society, that comes right out of those apprenticeships you served, right? And then it's interesting as you listen for ways in which African people have attempted to do the same, even when they didn't have the type perhaps of background, which is why when you wrote A View from the East, it was so important to have a memory kept moment where you inscribe the memory of those who were looking for those kind of things as well and their impact. I wonder if you have any thoughts or any comments on how you have used these institutions, not only to listen, but to act, as you say, to hear, to move through the world in action. And how has that trajectory shifted over the years? I mean, I'm sure it's not accidental that that book on the East, which Syracuse University Press published is now published by your own diasporic African press, as is Transatlantic Africa, your history of the last several centuries of African people's movements through the world, which starts with Oxford University Press, and then in an expanded edition, Diasporic African Press. Is there, I mean, are you spirit-led to kind of ground now in these Black institutions like the ones you've chronicled and inscribed, and how does spirit help guide your research projects and your work?
Well, that's a great question, and I'm going to disappoint you because the answer is pretty simple. You said it. That's what it is, in that, you know, I'm driven by intuition. Now, sometimes, you know, there are a few occasions where I don't listen.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there are. And guess what? My particularly my grandfather, you know, who I've described, you know, I call him for this purpose, Nana Yao. He's born on Thursday. But my grandfather, yeah, he remind me that you know, he'll tell me, for example, that don't ask questions you already know the answers to. So sometimes they'll admonish me, but I know they always have my back. You know, I'll tell you something else. Then I'll circle back to, you know, the sort of question.
Take your time, brother. This is what's what we wanted from you.
Lay out. I was in Benin in 2005, and again, I didn't realize why I was there. But I was in Benin 2005, but it felt like home. And you know, I was in Cotonou, the capital. I was in Abomey, Cotonou, and a few other places. But while in Cotonou, I was staying in the residence property. Actually, I was leading a group of students. I was lead faculty for a group of students. We spent 2 weeks in Benin, 2 weeks in Ghana. You know, one of the best dual trips I've done before. Now I've done several of them, study abroad, but this one was really cool. Nonetheless, I'm sleeping, you know, in the residence where we stayed in Cotonou, and I had a dream, you know, a particular night. And when I woke up, I wrote the dream down. The dream went something like this: several ancestors came to me. It was a group of them, actually, which I had not seen before. Usually it's an old man or a woman or both, but this time it was a group of them. And they came to me and said, "We really like what you're doing, but you have to do more." Wow. They said, "You have to teach the world about African spirituality and culture." Then they left. And so that's 2005.
That's 2005, right?
Yeah, right. Hey,
and so y'all, listen, you all go to kwasikonadu.info. Yeah. The dozens of articles, a dozen books, own published company. They told you in 2005.
2005. And so that was a year after I finished up at Howard. That was a year after, 2 years before the medicine book came out. Yeah. And so that's what my life's work has been about. It's definitely the arc of my life work is definitely about, you know, the thriving of African people in the world, right? Yeah. And that we don't have to cannibalize each other. We all can eat. And indeed, to do that, you know, my argument to us and to them is that our power base, our nuclear weapon, without the corrosive side effects, is our spiritual culture, because it is the analog to the digital, you know, disaster that we live in. Yeah. And so when they said that to me, it just made it clear. It mapped everything out for me. And I knew that's why I had to be there in Benin 2005, right? I haven't met the Hogun, like the head leader of the Vodun for the entire nation. As you know, Benin has Vodun and Catholicism as national religions for Catholicism and national spiritual systems for Vodun. Yeah. And so I met the head Ogun in Cotonou, and he gave me a talisman, in fact, and you know, he was very generous to me. I met others, you know, that were there, and so it really was a form of homecoming. But I didn't realize the magnitude of it until I started actually doing more of that kind of work. So every project I've done has been the first of its kind, and I'm not boasting or bragging. It's just
no. Can I interject here? Just
yes.
No. Your book on the East, and we are both children of the Pan-African nationalist movement. And for those who, this is just the opening of the way. We looking forward to having you back a number of times. When you mentioned your brother who was at the school you were working at, who had the connection in Ghana, of course, that is a way open. And and you all mark this now, Council of Independent Black Institutions. We're going to talk about those African-centered schools in a minute. So there's footnotes to everything we've been in this conversation. But when you know, there's a generosity, not only your spirit, but in the way that you inscribe. And when you tell the story of the East, it is absolutely, as James Turner says in the introduction, and then as our brother and your brother Scott Brown in particular is in just the second edition, there's a generosity of spirit in helping bring to the world the story of this living community of folk who are about building community and sustaining community and protecting community. I mean, is that, that generosity that you exhibit, including the fact that your ancestors have your back, clearly. We're not going to let you out here. It reminds me of, again, I mentioned Gerald Horne.
Yeah.
Calls it ruthless synthesizing when he archive and just consumes that. But in many ways, you remind me generationally of one of the great elders, of course, Toyin Falola, as we talk about, guided by this spirit, man, this sustaining thing. I mean, is that what led you in those first couple of projects, the medicinal piece, and then the East, and such a powerful institution? Can you say a few words about those first couple of books and how this kind of exhibits what you've been talking about?
Sure thing. Well, the medicine book came out of my dissertation. Did some more work afterwards, but that came out of the dissertation work. And that, again, was firmly Ancestry, because the first healer and the foremost healer in my heart, in my spirit, is my grandfather. So he's all over that book. I first came to learn about medicines and about plant life. In fact, the sort of street language for healers in Jamaica, they call them bush doctor, because they live in plants, and so did my great grandmother and her mother and their mother and so on and so forth, lived in plants, and that's really where the power is. The power is in actually medicines, and so. That book definitely was my grandfather's all over that. And then, of course, the East, that was very much, part of, my time with another elder who's now an ancestor, Dr. James Turner. He was like another father to me. But guess what? He had that same effect on thousands of people.
Yes.
And as I said, one of his, tribute panels that we did for him, I don't know how he did that, made people feel as if he was their father without ever taking away time and effort from his own biological children, right?
Yes.
How he could be a father for thousands and do so for his own. To me, that seemed to be, sort of the impossibilities of impossibilities.
We got one more break, and when we come back, we're going to continue this conversation. So we're going to take our final break here at the Black Star Network on the Black Table with Dr. Kwasi Konadu. This is his first moment at the table, but we are going to claim for the elders and ancestors that it won't be his last. We're going to have a conversation, as you see. We'll be back in a moment with our final session, segment here at the Black Table for this session. Back in a moment.
We feel the hidden impacts of climate change that land harder in Black, Brown, and Native communities.
Not many people talk about it because they clearly don't know our lives. But with President Biden's landmark infrastructure and climate plans, our issues are finally seen.
Removing lead pipes means we know our water is safe. Cutting carbon pollution helps our kids breathe easier. 1.5 million new jobs means stable work in communities. The impact we need
right now.
Welcome back to the Black Table here on the Black Star Network. I'm your regular host, Greg Carr, and please support the network, support all the shows. Join the Bring the Funk fan club. Download the app. Tell your friends. We're on many platforms and about to be on many more, so stay tuned. We're going to finish up this section with our brother, Dr. Kwasi Konadu. When we left, you really helped frame, in fact, you framed why this intellectual work is done. It's done for us in these recent texts. And there's so many things. By the way, I just pulled a few of the ones, Diasporic African Press. I hope you'll say a word about that. This is that book, of course, on James Turner, Discourse on Africana Studies that you published with the press that you started. You had a number of projects in the works. And I'm wondering if you could say something about, how you work kind of simultaneously. I know Empires of Gold is coming out, History of African Diasporas, People's History of Jamaica, the Transatlantic Slaving Diet. Those who don't look at the world the way that you look at it would say, this man is a remarkably prolific scholar. But it seems almost as if this work is just like as a consequence of the real work that you came into this. Can you talk a little bit about even these future projects and how they connect to what you've done today?
Sure thing. It seems like you've been tapping the recipe.
Oh no, brother. Look, you giving us life. All and these young people, they listen to this. Yeah. This is transformational, Bob. Mm-hmm. Please.
Well, definitely. Well, what folks, that are viewing, that will view this, may not appreciate or recognize is that I spend even more time and energy, on being a father. And so how is that possible to do all these things? Well, you said it. I mean, you have the secret sauce or recipe, if there is a secret, which is that, what are my values? What I value. I value my family, my children. I value, obviously, my people, spiritual culture, and all that it pertains to, all that matters. And so once you have that GPS, once you have those coordinates, everything else sort of falls into place and simple. So I personally, for me, in terms of short biography, I've never drank, I've never smoked, I don't do drugs, I don't fornicate, I don't, do those kinds of things. And so it keeps me much more disciplined and focused on what really matters. And that to me is people. First about my family and then my people. And in doing so, it's not surprising that I have not only the energy, but also the focus and to do it. And by to do it, I mean, you got to get it done at some point, right? And so I'm able to get it done because most of these work they bleed into each other. And so, for example, the work of the press, Diasporic Africa Press, Diasporic Africa Press, that work is an extension of my own scholarship, though it's separate from my scholarship, right? And my scholarship is an extension of, my healing work, in the sense that that's my compass when I look into or go into a project or go into an archive or go into a community. Is I'm thinking about, okay, what's driving me here? What's motivating me here? And let me put that into some, concrete form to be able to tell the story that needs to be told, for the broader African world, the benefit of the African world. And so, and that spirit, of course, that drives me is baked in Ancestry. And so one of the recent projects that I've embarked on, and some might think I'm extending myself, but it's not, because these are just really extensions of this package that I am, which is there's a YouTube channel that I've started recently called Powered by Ancestry, not surprisingly.
Excellent.
And that came from my ancestors saying that, hey, you got to keep doing this. And so it's a way in which for me to distill a lot of my work into plain language, digestible parcels of about episodes which form no more than 15 to 17 minutes apiece. Given the attention spans and the demands on people's attentions in the digital world that we inhabit. And so Powered by Ancestry, the reception so far has been pretty good. I'm not focused on numbers per se. I'm focused on whoever checks it in, and that's who I'm feeding. And if they feel inclined, they can share with others, and then they too will be fed. So the positive feedback so far has been great, but I don't do it for that. I'm doing it for Ancestry. And so Powered by Ancestry has really been another outgrowth of the publishing, of the healing work, of the scholarship, where I can put those all together and put them in one place that is accessible, that is distilled, and that people can come to and tap anytime, for whatever their needs may be, that channel may fill. And then in terms of new projects, you mentioned Empires of Gold. That book is finished. It was finished actually in November. I finished writing it. That's the next big book. And this may sound, for those that know my work, hyperbolic, but that's probably my best book so far.
Really?
Yeah.
Here, brother. That's a hell of a.
It's heavy. In fact, in Tree you say emudu. It's deep. That one is probably my best work so far. But guess what? I haven't crest yet.
No question. Oh well, no. There is no crest.
I haven't crest yet.
Like that. Not in this
so far, and really, I thought about it within myself. I said, I thought Our Way in This Part of the World was the best one, and it is that I've done so far, because it was so much. 15 years going into that one. And not to say that others have been shortchanged, because they haven't been, but This one,
for purposes, many Black women are disfortunate, as I told you before we started.
Yeah,
so powerful because you're bringing these sisters to life as representative figures. I mean, it's really pushing back. We talked to Howard French a few months ago, and Born in Blackness. But this is something different. You're anchored in us in a different way. So I mean, but anyway, so differently perhaps all these different people. But this Empires of Gold, you say, it's hit different on this side.
That one, and of course, the book on the Black women that you had in your hand a moment ago. That one, I didn't plan that one, but the sister Graça. I only know her Portuguese name. I think it means beloved one or anointed one. Graça, she was talking to me. I came upon her inquisitional file, and it's a difficult, hand. It's Gothic hand that's written in. And it's short, really. It's about 20, 25 folios. But she was speaking to me, and I had to do it. And so I kept on working, and it was difficult. It was tough. But as I'm working through it, then I came upon Monica's file. This is sort of the order of sequence. And then Ajua's one was in passing. Actually, all I know of Ajua is a name. It has a name in passing. But that one's about method, which is to say, hey, you lazy scholars or people who pretend to be scholars that claim that the sources aren't there, we have to fabulate or make things up. No, you don't have to make things up. You need to know how to do this kind of work, and I'm going to show you how.
No question.
And I say this with all humility, right? Right. And guess what? Brother Greg?
Yes, sir.
Scholars don't do that. They don't publish their work. They keep it to themselves and hoard it.
Yes.
I'm saying, look, you can check me if you think, if you have questions about what I do and how I do it. In fact, I'm going to feed you because I know you don't read these sources. I know you don't do this kind of work, but I'm going to feed you and students who would need this nourishment. I'm going to put it out to say, hey, if you want to test me, if you want to check me, if you want to challenge me on how I do what I do, here you go.
Here you go.
Right? Here you go. Here's a gift for you. But more importantly, those sources to me are crucial because the Portuguese are the first European empire that had the most sustained contact in Western Africa up until the 17th century. And yet there was nothing on the former Gold Coast or Mina Coast about them available in English. Yes, there were some scattered things here and there, but nothing of this magnitude. Not only
changed the
entire history of what we thought about this sort of so-called early modern period of the Gold Coast, but also Portugal and the empire, because these are intertwined history. In other words, I remember a student asking me in my modern African history class, why do we have to tell the story of Africa with the Europeans? I said, well, they're part of the story. You can't leave them out, and so they're part of the story. And so whoever the actors are, they have to be part of the story. Whatever your disdain may be, for their acts and their intent, they're part of the story. Yes. And what I'm saying, in other words, is that the story of Portugal and its empire is recasted now, right?
Yeah.
In many ways that Empires of Gold does that job. And Empires of Gold, takes its sources from about 16 countries. Archives. It takes it, so it spans really. It's African history and world history married.
Yes. In fact, that's a good place for us to kind of bring this session to a pause until the next time that we talk. And first of all, as you were talking, I pulled it up. Everybody needs to go to Powered by Ancestry. Like you say, I mean, it's so that we can connect, and we're gonna stress that from here on in. I'm glad to see it myself here. Finding your people. It looks like he just posted. That's the latest one. So we gotta do that. But in terms, as we know, Chancellor Williams, of course, said, all this work has to be done by teams. And given the fact that even in your relative youth to date, all the languages, all the travel, all the connecting, all the ability to translate through layers and then bring people into conversation with each other, ancestors, those right now, and then speaking to the future. How important is it, particularly as I think about young people looking at this, how important is it for us to build community in work like this, because you're absolutely right, man. The West, it's all about getting out there first and hiding it from everybody until, and so it as what is it? Ikwe Oma may say in 2000 season, that's spring water flowing to the desert, brother. What do you
right.
I mean, how important is it for us to the spirit of generosity that you exhibit? I mean, how should people think about this in terms of connections and doing work together?
Well, it goes back to a saying that I mentioned a moment ago, which I firmly hold dear, which is that we don't have to cannibalize each other, right? We peoples of African ancestry, for lack of a better phrasing or term, certainly have our intra-African, challenges, but we also have a lot of beauty and gifts and connections that need to be played up to say that, we don't need to cannibalize each other, that we can all eat. And so that's where the generosity is essentially saying, hey, here's my platter contribution to that table where we can all eat.
Yes.
And so, there's nothing, that I do that is done out of any, selfish motive or because I want to, receive promotion or tenure, which I already have. But
right.
That's not my motive, never was my motive. In fact, I declined one time. I was offered a chair position. I declined it because I don't want to do that. I want to be able to get in, do my thing, and get back to my family and what I care about.
Yes.
And so the sort of generosity spirit that you refer to me, that is the motive force. But the generosity also has to be also protective, right, of itself.
Yes, sir.
Because it can be abused, it can be taken advantage of, it can be misused, and so it has to be always generous, but also guarded against those forces that would want to either use it for its own purposes or make it into something that it's not. And so, to me, that is the message for young people, including my daughters who are 12 and 14. Is that the key to life is staying who you are, but you can't stay who you are if you don't know who you are.
Yes.
In other words, you can't stay on a balance beam if you don't know how to balance. And that balancing act is between this, physical material world and the spiritual one, right? And this is what I'll close it on my part, if it's time to close, is that, the vehicle is our physical human body, blood, plasma, brain, etc., mind. That's the vehicle. The spirit is the driver of that vehicle. And the GPS is the ancestry, because they came before us and they know where we're going, because they know the roads because they built it.
Yes, yes. I think I'm going to say less and let that resonate. That, as the Egyptians would say, Medu Nefer, that's good speech. There, brother. So listen, we can't thank you enough for joining us in this inaugural motion, and we hope you'll come back soon. We want to get you some time, more time with you. Even though it's a finite resource, I guess, and maybe it's not a finite resource as we know. So
I say, well, not for me. Anytime that I'll be, honored to come back, you let me know.
Definitely will.
I make time for those I care about. So
same here, brother. Same. We love you, brother, and
love you too, man.
Yes, sir. So y'all go to Kwasi, Kwasi, Konadu, KONADU.info. You'll see the information there. Please go to Powered by Ancestry and get this knowledge, because that's what I'm gonna be doing. And so we'll say until next time to you, brother Konadu, and thank you, brother. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely. We'll be back here. Oh, you too, Baba, you and the family, to everyone. So we'll be back here in a moment at the black table to clear the table, and we will see you in a moment after this break.
We feel the hidden impacts of climate change that land harder in Black, Brown, and Native communities.
Not many people talk about it because they clearly don't know our lives. But with President Biden's landmark infrastructure and climate plans, our issues are finally seen.
Removing lead pipes means we know our water is safe. Cutting carbon pollution helps our kids breathe easier. 1.5 million new jobs means stable work in communities. The impact we need
right now.
Hatred on the streets, a horrific scene, a white nationalist rally that descended into deadly violence.
White people are losing their damn minds.
As an angry pro-Trump mob storms the U.S. Capitol, we're about to see the rise of what I call white minority resistance.
We have seen white folks in this country who simply cannot tolerate black folks voting.
I think what we're seeing is the inevitable result of violent denial.
This is part of American history. Every time that people of color have made progress, whether real or symbolic, there has been what Carol Anderson at Emory University calls white rage as a backlash.
This is the rise of the Proud Boys and the Boogaloo Boys. America, there's going to be more of this.
There's all the Proud Boys, guys.
This country is getting increasingly racist in its behaviors and its attitudes because of the fear of white people.
The fear that they're taking our jobs, they're taking our resources, they're taking our women. This is white fear.
Welcome back to the Black Table here on the Black Star Network. We've spent our hour with a powerful brother, scholar, healer, son, husband, father, a real master teacher, institution builder, publisher, who is modeling the way that we can move through the world, powered by our ancestors, Dr. Kwasi Konadu. We'll take this moment as we clear the table to reflect on the life of a recent ancestor, someone who you may not see in the white-facing media celebrated the way that he should be celebrated and remembered. And that, of course, is a native son, an African born in Richmond, Virginia, and that is the great Randall Robinson. Randall Robinson made transition recently in St. Kitts at the age of 81, the founder of Trans-Africa Forum in 1976 and 77, at one time chief of staff for Charles Diggs of the Congressional Black Caucus, worked with Bill Clay out of Missouri. His brother Max Robinson was the first Black anchor of a major news show, ABC. You saw Max Robinson on television back in the 70s. Well, his brother Randall, like Max, graduate of Virginia Union University, started out at Norfolk State University, went to Harvard and got a law degree, but used that law degree as a weapon for the struggle of African people globally for his entire adult life. Randall Robinson, who made transition recently, is someone who we will devote a future Black Table conversation to. And as we clear the table, we are reminded that when he wrote his book, Quitting America, Randall Robinson said that I tried to love America. America never loved me, but I loved my nation in America. And that nation was the Black nation. And that nation knows no borders. So as I moved to my wife's country of birth, St. Kitts, he traveled all over the world from there, including back and forth to the United States. But he said, I am no more an African born in the United States than I am a Haitian, than I am a Nigerian, than I am an African born anywhere else. My country is my people. And he lived that way. So we wish him safe ancestral journey and ancestral protection as he will continue to speak to us. So join us next week here at the Black Table. And we are always grateful. And tell a friend, tell more than one friend, tell the nation. It's time to come to the Black Star Network. See you next week.